welcome to another episode of the Home Birth Dad podcast, a podcast about the crunchy life that we think both mom and dad can chew on. My name is Rylan Oakes. I'm the head designer at homebodythreads.com and the host of the Home Birth Dad podcast. I know this is a much more stripped down audio and video intro than normal. We've been super busy with both Homebody Threads and with my other company, The Color Brand, where I do marketing for midwives and doulas and other companies. And so as a result, I wasn't able to get to my normal mic setup. And that's also why it's been a while since we had another episode. But we have a great episode for you guys today with someone that we've gotten to know very well. Shelby Tolar is the head of Love to Mama. They are a birth education company, and they are actually putting on a workshop in Dallas on June 11th. We will be there with them selling our threads and being a part of the workshop. So we wanted to do an interview with her to hear about birth education and how she handles doing that for both moms and dads. It was a great conversation. You guys are really going to love it. So I don't want to waste any more time. Let's go ahead and get into today's conversation with Shelby.
Okay, everyone, welcome to another episode of the Home Birth Dad podcast. I'm very excited today to be talking to someone I've been talking to for a while, but in a different way. So we're here today with Shelby Tolar. She is the founder and owner of Love to Mama, who has a workshop coming up very soon, this month actually. So we'll be talking about that. But Shelby, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to finally meet you in person, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, Shelby is someone we've actually been talking to for a while. We reached out, I guess maybe a month or so back. Actually, a while back, more than that, because we were still planning out. We were trying to sort of get a plan in order for in-person events. As we've just gotten started, we've tried to sort of make sure we do an in-person event once a month. So we were at the Association of Texas Midwives Convention, and now we'll be with you, and then the Prego Expo in a few months. And so we also, in addition to like our custom T-shirts, we've wanted to put it out there for more businesses, especially birth worker businesses, that we can help with sort of custom designs. And so that's how we first got to know each other. But since then, we've been ramping up towards this workshop that we'll be a vendor at. So I'm very excited to talk about the workshop, but I want to start a little further back and just talk about you in terms of, how did you kind of get into this world? And then we can talk a little bit about how you started Love to Mama.
Awesome. Okay. So I guess I would say it started in 2017 when we were finally pregnant with our first, and we took the birth boot camp classes. So we actually took the exact class that I teach now, which is, the irony is not lost on me at all. But it was awesome.
Nice.
We took it at a different birth center at the time, and it was like a 10-week class. And it was really one of my favorite things during pregnancy that we did. It was so fun. The class was fun. It was bonding. I knew nothing. I was not of this crunchy birth world, but I knew that a documentary I watched in college made me want to have a natural birth. And so
What was the documentary?
The Business of Being Born.
It's always the business of being born.
It's always.
Same for us.
Really? Okay, that makes me so happy. It makes me so happy. Yeah, it changed everything. I knew, again, I wasn't even like a crunchy lifestyle at the time. I just remember I was always fascinated by birth. I grew up watching A Baby Story on the TLC, like all these weird things. But then I watched the documentary just on my own, and I was floored. Like I was appalled by a lot of it, honestly. So totally single at the time, not even thinking about marriage. And then I'm like, I'm having a natural birth. So fast forward like 6 more years later, I'm married and I'm pregnant. And so we find a birth boot camp class, and I loved it. I mean, we learned everything. And so then I have my first, which unfortunately the birth was extremely traumatic. And rocked my world and left me with PTSD for about a year. And so that was not at all what I had in mind for motherhood. Yeah, it was brutal. I walked into a therapist in crisis mode is what they called it at 4 months postpartum. And again, did not expect that to be part of my story, but it was. So we had an emergency C-section with her. So I kind of like threw the book out and was like, well, that was dumb. Like, why did we even take the class? Like, we didn't get any of it. And there was so much shame in that. There was so much shame. I remember going to what we call the reunion, where we all come back together after all the babies are born. And our instructor had it like at a restaurant, and we all went around and told our stories. And I was the only one that transferred and had a C-section. And I just felt like I didn't belong in that group. And it was a horrible feeling. So fast forward, like our baby's like 2 and we get pregnant again. And we were like, okay, like we're going to do it. We're going to have a VBAC. We're going to do it a different way this time. And then I was, how far along was I? I was my due date was supposed to be at the end of April. So at 2020, we have not only are trying for a VBAC, but global pandemic. And so things were crazy. Like the due date was like, I think two weeks after the shutdown or something wild. So,
oh my gosh,
we had been kind of looking at having to transfer care again. I have a blood disorder, so we were keeping an eye on platelets, which is the thing that tanked last time. It was a very stressful time. And then she decided to stay in there in 11 extra days. But all that said and done, I got my VBAC at the birth center, in the bathtub, everything that I had ever dreamed of. And it was truly healing and redemptive. And it was like the piece of the puzzle that I needed to like see this whole thing through, believe in birth again. And so she was 5 weeks old when I reached out to our personal instructor and was like, I want in. And then that's how that all started. So we had nothing to do. Obviously, we were in our home, not doing anything during that time. And so I started training and doing all of my certification process. And because I had literally nothing to do but nurse a baby and hang out in the house, I got it done really fast and was able to do training. So she was born in May. I got my materials in July and I did training and took my test in September. And then my first class was in October of 2020 and I haven't stopped since.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a great story. I mean, seriously, I feel like your story is, in one sense, your story is not unique in that a lot of parents, that first birth doesn't quite go right.
Yeah.
And so it can cause, and that might be for a number of reasons that I've found just talking to midwives and doulas. Sometimes it's just because of certain health conditions and just things that you can't really like foresee until you're there. And then sometimes it's because of like moms being in an environment that they, wasn't ideal, like whether it's a hospital or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And so the idea, it's common, I think, that it's after that first birth that moms feel like, this next time, either, like you said, it's like either you feel this sense of like, oh, I'm not going to get what I want, or it further incentivizes you that like, no, this second time I'm going to do it the way that I wanted to do it. So I think that's just fantastic that second time you were able to actually do it. Anytime I hear about a VBAC, I'm just incredibly like, that's just awesome. Do you mind, just for the sake, because I know that we have listeners that are either moms that then try to get their husband to listen, or they listen to it with their husband. Can you explain like what a VBAC is?
Yes. So a VBAC stands for vaginal birth after cesarean. So because my first was a C-section, anything past that's called a VBAC. So it's, you don't always get a VBAC. And I obviously wasn't an instructor at the time, so I didn't really understand like what a huge deal it was that I was able to have a successful VBAC. But now that I've taught for almost 3 years, I see it not happening for a lot of people. And I just am like, I will never be more thankful than I am for that experience. So
sure.
Yeah.
what do you think, just for those maybe that are listening that have, maybe their first birth did, they had a C-section and we're wondering now. And I think as well, I see that where, natural birth is becoming more and more normal, like especially in areas like DFW, it's been a thing, but it's even more so becoming, the go-to form of birth. But I feel like because it's, for some women, they catch onto it later. They've already had a C-section and now they're like, oh, well, now that I'm so informed about this, I want to try like that natural birth and a birth in my own home and a birth on my own terms. Like that sounds awesome, but can I do it? Because now I've already had a C-section. What do you think in your experience teaching? What do you think are some things that, right now, if somebody's in that spot where they're thinking, oh, I want to try to have a natural birth and a vaginal birth, is there anything you would like recommend that like right now they go ahead and start sort of doing or getting into the mindset of to try and up their chances of having that?
For sure. I know it's going to sound like so cliche, but education. So not only am I just like a birth educator, but like I'm truly like, you have to know your rights. You have to know the things that you can decline. You have to understand that there's a thing called informed consent and that you are not just forced into any birth, but a lot of people, they just trust whatever care provider they're with. And if they say jump, they ask how high, and so making sure that you're educated and that you have a really great care provider and not somebody that is just going to do what's called TOL, trial of labor, but someone who is like for VBAC, supportive, not just like you can try, like, you know what I'm saying? There's a difference.
Yeah,
between...
those sort of right off the bat will like discourage you, like, well, I don't, and I've heard that too. Like if you have the wrong provider, they sort of just say like, well, it's riskier. And so no, just not going to try it. And like you said, and if that's your doctor and you trust them, it's like, okay, I guess I just can't do it now. Yeah.
I mean, and there's what's called a VBAC risk assessment. So you can't, not everybody is a good candidate for a VBAC. Like, and I truly believe that if you're not a good candidate, it's not safe. And like, you're just going to have to lay that dream down and like grieve that. But if you have what's called a lower transverse, abdominal incision from your C-section and you had a double stitch, those are things that are going to most likely give you a better chance at having a successful VBAC. So there's a lot to do with the incision, where it was, how it was done, how close together the pregnancies were, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a true assessment list that, I had to take it. It's like you get points, like a little point system. And if you pass or fail, really, to see if you can have a VBAC. So there's a lot that goes into it, but an amazing care provider in the birth space that you feel comfortable in and a really great education class, it's a really good start.
Awesome. So let's talk about that then. Let's talk about, you went from having that success story, which I also find is a trend that if a mom, has a positive experience with, natural birth or with birth that, they got to prepare for and they got to make the decisions for, I find that often leads women into working in the world of natural birth because they want it for other women. And there is often a sense, I'd say, especially outside of like places like DFW where it's really popular, there's a lot of women who like don't feel like they're educated enough or they have a doctor who like doesn't give them the resources. So talk to me about, you decided, I'm going to get into this. I'm going to become an educator myself. How did that lead into the decision of, no, I'm going to start Love to Mama?
Yeah. So I was 5 months postpartum, which I still look back and think, oh my gosh, like that was pretty fresh. But I started teaching because of exactly the reason you said, like I wanted other people to know that there were other choices and that they didn't have to comply to whatever their care provider said, or that, just some questions to ask before like signing, away all of this. So when I had my natural VBAC, it was so different. Like I became an entirely different person. So the person that I was when I had my first, like I sadly did not recognize her after. And there were parts of me that I felt like I was still on that operating table, and it took a long time to get that back. And so when I realized how life-changing that was, I was like, we cannot flippantly sign ourselves up for like birth trauma, just unknowingly signing ourselves up for like life-changing. I mean, truly, I'll never be the same from that. So it was more of just a passion to be like, it doesn't have to be once a C-section, always a C-section. It doesn't have to be like, yes, ma'am, to your care provider's, wishes. It's about you. Like it's your birth. And I just became kind of fiery, passionate about letting everybody know, like, this is your birth. This is not your care provider's birth. This is your and your husband's birth. And so that beams through my class. I really kind of lean in on those points. Like, yes, phases of labor in your body and the things that it will do, we're going to educate that, but your voice matters. And if you lose your voice and you lose that birth, like that birth dream, it's okay to grieve. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be angry. And because I've been on both sides, I felt like, wow, okay, I think I'm really equipped to speak on both ends of this, because I had a C-section, baby was healthy. I recovered from a C-section. I've recovered from birth trauma, but I also got a VBAC. I also had a natural birth. So I've experienced an epidural. I've experienced like both sides of things where they could like believe in like what I'm saying. Like I'm not just somebody teaching from a book, but I'm somebody that like went through these things. And I'm also like adamantly opposed to receiving fear. Like there's a way to do it where you can present the information on a C-section and on transferring of care and things like that. But I don't want to ever scare my students, because I feel like from the time little girls are born, we know that childbirth is the most excruciating thing you're ever going to go through. And that is garbage. First of all, that is such garbage. And so I try really hard to protect that space and make sure they know, like, A, that's a safe place, but also, like, we're not going to just sit here and just scare ourselves about postpartum or about when the birth goes wrong, because there's so many beautiful things about birth that people don't talk about. So I make sure to like really toe the line on both sides. And because of my experience, I'm able to, I think, do that pretty adequately.
Sure. And I think that's a really great mindset. I mean, I can say like with me and my wife, like, because like you, I had no experience in this world. I grew up like totally thinking that like birth just happened in a hospital all the time, except in the olden days when we had no choice, like we only did that because we didn't have something better. And watching movies, with like moms like screaming and, all of that. And so when we got into it, which the business of being born definitely like kicked it off. And then I started serving midwives and doulas, running their social media. So I started to get informed. My wife then became a doula. So then she started to be informed on it, sort of that, firsthand basis. I feel like when you're first getting into it, having what you're talking about, like this total full knowledge, is so important to whether or not just whether you do it at all, like you go the natural birth route, but do it with excitement. Because I think, and you see this a lot of like, mom kind of gets into it, dad doesn't know anything about it, so he's letting her do it. Like in his mind, he's like, okay, sure, I'll step back and you go ahead. But he's scared, he's really afraid. And I think it's naive to think like, oh, that doesn't affect mom. Like, dad constantly just being afraid, that you're going to die or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I think that's your approach is, I think, really great for both moms and dads of like, we will discuss what needs to happen if things don't go well, like,
Right.
or if we didn't get what we wanted. Like, we will be prepared. We're not going to just be like, oh, everything's going to go super smooth no matter what.
Yeah.
But having that attitude and that tone of, but that's worst case scenario. We're not going into this thinking like everything's going to go wrong.
Yeah.
Because I do think so many people, like, that's how they think about birth. It's an emergency situation where like something is wrong and we need to just like make sure that mom can get baby out without getting hurt.
Right. Right.
So I think that's a great approach. And I'm sure you see that. I'm sure as an educator, you see that, people coming without you having to inject any fear, they bring it. Like they come with it.
Yes.
Dads especially, I would imagine.
Especially my dad's, like, I love my moms, but my dads have a special place in my heart because they're terrified. And I get that. And so they also think they don't belong. Kind of like what you were saying is like, they don't belong. They're just being supportive. This is their job to like sit here and do these classes.
Right.
So our first class, like, I make sure to tell my dads, by the way, this is just as much for you as it is for her. Like, we have a whole class dedicated to like your role in the birth space. And they're like, wait, what? So by about class 2, they're understanding like, oh, okay. And it's my favorite. Like, I call it the dad card, but it's top 10 tools for partners. And it's truly like a checklist of what they can do. Offer her a drink of water, encourage her, make sure when her eyes are open after that contraction, you're nodding and like kind of affirming her. And he's like, oh, okay. So once they realize how important their role is, they're all in. And then they become supportive. And then once they figure out, oh, a midwife carries drugs for postpartum hemorrhage, a midwife is, neonatal resuscitation certified, et cetera, it's like, okay. And then when we talk on the other end, like hospitals, the way they treat mom, a lot of the times, not having consent, doing routine episiotomies, et cetera, they're like, oh my gosh, like they almost become protective. Actually, that's the perfect word. They become really protective of the birth space. So yeah, they get won over pretty quick because I tell them, you don't belong behind a bed. Your role is not to step in and hold her hand a few times, like, during labor. Like, you're the person she wants when she opens her eyes to scan the room. Like, it's your hand that she wants to hold. The doula cannot bring that same oxytocin. They can't bring the same comfort. And I tell this story of like, in my second birth, I remember my eyes were closed. I'm pushing out a baby in the bathtub and I like reach over to grab my husband's hand and I end up grabbing my doula's hand and I'm like, oh, like, no. And I remember just like, this is not what I want, but I had grabbed a hand and I wasn't going to let go until that contraction was over. And then I was like, no, it didn't bring the same comfort. Like, he's the person. And so, yeah, he gets a lot of pride in that. Like, and he becomes pretty territorial. I love it. I love it so much.
Yeah, well, and I think, like you said, I think that's the result of, that's the result of the education happening before you get there. Because I think that moment can so easily, if everyone's not coming into it, ready, that moment can very easily just become unorganized and sort of urgent because by that point, there's no more time to like prepare. We can't stop and go through like the card right now, or we can't sit down and like go through a course on our computer. At that moment, it's like whatever we came in here with, those are the tools. Yeah. So I think, in my own experience, like going into the birth, because I, and I think in your case, you're like, yes, dads need to go through the course with mom. Do not just be like, she's going to go do that and I'm not going to hear a word about it. Right. And then we're going to get there and, whatever. It's like, I went through the course with my wife so that when we got to, which it's funny, we also had our second baby like in a bathtub and the whole thing.
Awesome.
But going into it knowing like, hey, if this happens, it means this. Or if this happens, the midwife and doula are going to do this. So I don't have to panic. You know, I know what this means. I think is what allows for that moment, like you said, to be a moment of like pride and a moment of like supportiveness and like, I'm here, because there's no scrambling. You know, you kind of leave that to the midwife or the doula. Like, if scrambling needs to happen, like they know what needs to happen.
Yes. And you said it, whatever you just said, it made me think of whatever that really great thing is that you just said about the dad is, you know, and I tell them like, it's like your job in this marriage and this relationship is to like protect her and like keep her safe.
Sure.
And so when you see her going through this, it's really hard not to want to like rescue her. And they're like, yeah, like watching her be in pain or uncomfortable or whatever you want to call it, like that's going to grate on him because his literal like DNA makeup is to rescue her. And I'm like, dude, that's really hard to sit there and watch your wife go through that. That's hard on you. So I acknowledge that because I also have a husband and I also watched how hard it was on him. But we also talk about there's a difference between suffering and pain, and we never want mom to be suffering, not once. Like that is that's not a victorious natural birth. That's going to be a traumatizing natural birth. And so they're like, oh, okay. So mom's not going to suffer. I'm like, no. Like intensity, of course, pain, sure, whatever you want to call it. And I actually give them, I kind of go off the books a bit and I just say, come up with a code word that's just for you guys, because she's not going to throw that code word out unless she absolutely means that she's done. Because we talk about transition where mom, transition's a wild ride where mom's giving up, shaking, sweating, throwing up, all these weird things. That's what it was you said. It's like, if he had not known what transition was and we hadn't played our cute little charades game, he'd be freaking out, freaking out. So that's when I'm like, it's all good. Transition's a funky place, but remember, like we talked about that. So if you see those things happening, but then they're like, okay, but you say give up. So then she says, I'm done. I quit. I can't do this. Do I rescue her? I'm like, well, that's the tricky part. You got to affirm her because as we know, transitions right before pushing, like you guys are really, really close to being done. So that's when I'm like, the code word. If the code word comes out, it's game over. And that's when you know she's suffering. That's when you know this is no longer something she wants. And so that's kind of extra tidbits that I give them. And they're like, okay, I got this. I know my code word. I know I can't rescue her, but I'm prepared to see transition. Yeah, it's great. They really do feel a lot more confident.
I think that's great too, because like you said, if you're already in this like position of, oh, I want to protect her, I think that can really easily, if you're not prepared, and I've heard stories of this as well, you know, like that can really easily turn into like dad trying to take over.
For sure.
And you can't do that either, because like this is her moment. Like she's trained very hard to be here. And so, just having the knowledge to know, I think it's almost like sometimes in like normal marriage, like there are times where, mom doesn't need, she's not asking you to fix it. She's not asking you to take over. She's just asking you to be there. She's asking you to like be affirming. And I think that's reflected in birth, like as both mom and dad being educated to know, like, this is my role and this is my role.
Yeah.
And, if I say this, I want you to do this, but I don't want you to try to like, don't freak out and think like, oh, we got to get out of here. We're abandoning ship. Like, I'm the one having the baby. Like, I'll tell you if we need to actually like abandon the whole thing.
Exactly.
The code word's good for that, I think.
Code word. It works. Everyone's like, oh, okay. Like that clicks. Because of course, I remember just in my own birth, like saying, this sucks. I can't do this. I don't want to do this, and of course at that moment, if dad doesn't know to expect that, he's like, is this when I tap out? Like we tap out? Like, is this it? Because they just really want to like help. But you can't take that from her. I mean, to birth a baby, like you can't take that from somebody. So it's like, okay, dad, like you can do this, but it's really just empowering her, affirming her, reminding her, this is the shortest part. You're about to push a baby out, and figuring out what's going to connect. And really, like, that's when I say, like, pull out the big guns, like every affirmation that you've got, that's the time to do it.
So talk to me then. In this last piece, I want to talk about postpartum, and I both in terms of like, let's talk about the workshop. So you decided to actually create a workshop focusing on postpartum. What led you to that aspect as like an educator to say this specific piece needs, it needs like an event to focus just on this?
Yeah. It was something I'd been thinking of for a while, and I just didn't know what it was going to look like. Last year was a total surprise, but
Sure.
I had a lot, like my own postpartum story, obviously, like my first was really rough. My second was redemptive and beautiful in every way.
Yeah.
And so then again, I saw both sides of that and how much help we needed the first time versus the second time. But then I had my own clients coming back to reunion saying, man, we've really struggled from the get-go with breastfeeding or my mental health or our relationship, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm.
And I wanted to help them. I kind of have a savior complex a bit. And I'm like, let me help you, but I can't. Like, that's not my job. And then I'm not the expert. So it was me just constantly like in text conversations, talking moms through stuff, or being like, hey, have you talked to this person or talked to this person? Here's this person. But it was like, there's a disconnect. Like there's just a total disconnect where we prepare, they took 10 weeks of birth classes, and then postpartum is like nothing. And I feel like postpartum for a lot of people is harder and lasts longer than the other stuff.
Right.
And so I never dreamed of it turning into I guess I could have dreamed it to turn into this. That'd be beautiful. But I didn't have any expectation that it would turn into this. And so I was thinking, we'll just have like a little tiny workshop at the birth center. So I pitched it to my midwife and was like, this is kind of what I'm thinking. I'll bring in like 3 speakers. We'll get like 10 couples. It'll just be like a one day, like afternoon kind of thing.
Sure.
And she was super excited about it. And she was like, I love this. Like, let's add a couple of these other topics. And so I think that night I went home and I posted on 2 kind of popular, like Facebook DFW birth something groups.
Mm-hmm.
And to my surprise, everybody was really excited about this opportunity. And so I posted very vague, like, I just need a few speakers for a workshop on these, I think it was 3 or 4 topics at the time. And I had 75 interviews happening between, I think, January to April or May. And so then I was like, oh my gosh, okay, well, obviously everybody, like, I think I've hit a spot that everybody was excited about, but now I have to choose key speakers. So I had interviews, like chiropractic interviews, and every category had like at least 5 to 10 interviews. And then I had to pick a speaker. So it became a whole thing. But that's how it started, was just my mom's needing connections and resources that I didn't have. And then seeing my Instagram, seeing my Facebook, seeing all the groups I'm in, why is there such a disconnect between accessing them? And it's because obviously moms are kind of known for not taking care of themselves, but then we get thrown into postpartum and all of a sudden we need to find help, and we have a fresh babe in our arms. So it's like, And so basically we'll turn to a mom's group on Facebook, and we all know how that turns out horribly. So yeah. Oh, it's terrible. Don't do it. So I love planning events, and was just thinking, like, let's make this fun. Like, let's make this not a doom and gloom workshop. Let's make this super fun. But like I said, last year, I had no idea that I would be looking for a 3rd venue, and creating sponsorships and a workbook and all of that. But oh my gosh, that's where we're at. And it's so exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is your second year to do it. Is that right?
It is, yes.
And what are the exact dates? I obviously know, but I want to
Yes,
like.
of course. It is June 11th and it's from 9 to 5.
Awesome. 9 to
Yes.
5. So what can people expect, at the event in terms of like what kind of will be going on? What can they sort of expect to be involved in during that time?
So many things. When they first walk in, if they haven't been to the venue, they're going to be pretty excited about the cozy atmosphere. That was really
Oh
important to
yeah,
me.
I love Redefined.
Oh my gosh, I could just sit
Redefined
there all
Coffee
day.
House.
It's the
Oh,
best.
it
Um,
is.
and when I was looking for venues, it was really important to have a very relaxed atmosphere where people weren't in
Hmm.
folding chairs in a white room, because in
Right.
order to break these walls down and to have these sometimes more difficult conversations or to be more vulnerable, a coffee shop, man, doesn't that just pull out deep conversation?
Definitely.
So finding a coffee shop vibe with comfortable seating for all of my moms was important. So that was when I ultimately reached out to them and was stoked to find out that they said yes. So they'll immediately walk in and realize this is going to be a really comfortable, cozy day.
Sure.
And then catering to all of your needs. So we've got a mother's room for breastfeeding, if they choose that. And then we've got changing station in the bathroom, a huge snack display, color coordinating, of course, of
Nice.
just unlimited snacks for all of your needs. And then the drip coffee and the water, they can help themselves to some of the other drinks and pastries at Redefined, which they should, because their drinks are amazing.
Definitely.
And then
Definitely.
we break it up because I know moms don't really want to sit in a chair for even though it's a comfortable chair, comfortable couch, like they're pregnant or they're holding a
Right.
baby, they need to get up. So we've broken it down into like a few speakers at the beginning, and then we do our vendor hours, what I call it. And that's where all the vendors go to their booths and everyone just meets and greets through that. And that goes
Definitely.
into their special lunch. So they go out, and if you know where Main Street Grapevine is, it's just the best place. And so they go out and they have a lunch date. They'll take a little activity with them for something to work on together, because I really want to, like, obviously one of the big topics we talk about is resuming intimacy or intimacy in general postpartum, because nobody talks about that. And so they have a little thing to do together, and then they'll come back and we'll get started with our resuming intimacy Q&A panel, which will be so fun. And then we'll do that for a bit. So sorry, people are walking in my house.
All good.
So we break it up so that there's speakers and then something to kind of get up, stretch, speakers. And then the breakout sessions are what I'm pretty stoked about too, because last year we only had one kind of extra class option, and this time we have two. So we're doing C-section recovery and pumping and hand expressing and baby wearing and all of that. So they get to choose two of those, which will be great. So extra stuff. And then we've got a dad speaker. So actually he opens up the whole thing, because like we talked earlier, like dads feel like they don't belong, but really they're going to see that they get merch, that a dad is the opening speaker. So there's a lot of really, sorry guys.
You're totally fine. Hey, no worries.
So it's just, I want everyone to know like they belong there, and that really, we just want to love on them. Like we want to educate them, of course, because the speakers are phenomenal, but also just like look around this room, like look at all these people that are here to help set you up for success in postpartum. And look how easy it is to meet them and get their business card. And it's stuck in your workbook as well. So hopefully that disconnect that I felt like we were having is getting a little bit easier, because this workbook, it's like a magazine. So if a mom is expecting and then has her baby and she's like, oh, where's my book? There was something about pelvic floor therapy. I think I'm really struggling with one of these. And it's like, yes, I am. Oh, look, I'll reach out to X, Y, and Z. So
that's so smart.
Thank you. That's what I wanted. I wanted it to be relatively easy, but also really fun. And then just tons of giveaways, because I'm like, just love on all these people, because postpartum's hard. Pregnancy's hard. It's all a little bit tricky.
Definitely. I mean, I'm excited because we'll be there as one of the vendors, and I've been looking forward to it. But now hearing your description of the event, and like you said, I just love your emphasis on, mom and dad together, because postpartum, like you said, it is, pregnancy is hard, labor is hard, but postpartum, I think, can be especially hard because it's so often a big mystery. Or it's like a bomb that you don't know, like, is a bomb going to go off? Is it going to be a big bomb? Is it going to be small?
Seriously.
So just being able to diffuse it as much as possible, I think, is so helpful for mom and dad together to know, like we were talking about with birth, like what to look for, what is concerning, what's not, how to make things better, when you need to reach out to someone else entirely. So I think you've got a great event on your hands. I cannot wait to be there. So June 11th, and you said it's from 9 to 5 on June 11th, Redefined Coffee House, which I can attest is amazing. I absolutely love them. So yeah, if you're listening and you live in the DFW area, head over to Grapevine for this event. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be a blast. We'll be there selling our home birth dad shirts, all kinds of different shirts, and it's going to be a really fun time. So Shelby, I've got to let you go in a minute because I've kept you for a while, but I feel like I could talk to you forever. Like, you've got.
Thank you.
You're a delight, and you also have such a, so much of the emphasis of the show is like, how can we make everybody feel excited about, birth, or excited about like living holistically or naturally, and you're just all about that. So this has been fantastic. But I have to ask, because I ask everybody that comes on the show, if you had a shirt that you wore, every day that kind of told people like, this is what I'm about, or this is what my work is all about, like what would be a good, not like the shirt, but if you had a shirt, what would it say?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I've been thinking, and I have two. So one is
perfect,
redefining postpartum, because I just feel like we went the wrong way with it, and we like really need to redefine it and go the other way, hence the whole workshop.
Definitely.
The other one is just like, I think of my class and just like transition, and like how, like what happens in transition, right? What happens in transition stays in transition. So I know that's probably a shirt, but I just think like,
that's good. I like that.
It's so true. And
that's super cute.
I don't know, something just kind of funny like that. So I'm torn on both.
What happens? No, those are both great. It's so funny. Actually, I think almost every time I've asked this question, there's been two. Everyone has always said, I've got two.
Oh, perfect.
So that's fantastic. What happens in transition? I'm going to write that down.
Please do.
That one's got some serious potential. Well, Shelby, thank you so much. I'm so excited to come to the event. I'm super excited about the shirt we designed for the event. I think it's super cute. I personally can't wait to wear it. And my wife, Jess, is super excited. So thank you so much. And thank you all for listening. And we will see you in the next episode.
Thank you, guys.
Again, we want to thank Shelby for today's amazing interview. It was so great to have her, and we cannot wait to be at the Postpartum Love to Mama workshop on June 11th, so this upcoming weekend. We hope you guys will be there at Redefined Coffee Shop in Grapevine. All those details will be down below in today's episode. But thank y'all for listening. As always, subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, Apple, Spotify. Leave us a review. All that stuff is super, super helpful. And of course, go get yourself some great threads at homebodythreads.com. We have stuff for moms, dads, and all the amazing people that support them, midwives, doulas, everybody. So go check that out and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at homebodythreads for more of the podcast and everything else that we put out. We hope you guys have a great one, and we will see you in the next episode.